Hello everyone, and thanks so much for tuning into our tutorial. The title of the tutorial we will present today is Multilingual Content Management in the Corr-Proust project. It will be presented by 3 affiliates of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Firstly, myself, my name is Claire Baytas. I'm a PhD candidate in comparative literature. I started working on the Corr-Proust project doing transcriptions and now have moved on to being a project manager.
Hello everyone, my name is Nicholas Strole and I recently finished my PhD in French from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Last year I was the project manager for Corr-Proust, and during that time I developed a SharePoint site to help with workflow management for the project, and I met with Dena Strong consistently throughout the year, and I'll let her present herself as well.
Hi, my name is Dena Strong. I'm with Technology Services at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I am both part of the Application Services web hosting team, and 4 hours a week I consult with the University Library with the Research Data Service team. So one of the benefits that brings is being able to bridge the gap between different units of campus. I can bring what I know about application services to people who come to the library asking for research consulting sorts of help. And so that is how we made this particular connection. I do want to reassure folks that, I know there are people, when you say the word SharePoint, they break out in hives. I honestly used to be one of them. And then we learned that SharePoint can be a very valuable tool if you make it work in the service of your team rather than trying to make your team adapt to it. It's a question of designing to adapt to your particular solutions. And so one of the things that we want to discuss in today's presentation is how to take the principles that we've used to come up with a workflow solution that fits your particular team, whether or not that solution is in SharePoint.
And before getting into the content management side of the project, I'll give you just a little bit of a background on what is involved in the project. So the main goal of the project is to expand the print transcriptions done by University of Illinois researcher Philip Kolb. And we have been, for the past few years, digitizing, transcribing, and encoding over 6,000 letters to and from Marcel Proust. And at the University of Illinois Library, there are over 1,000 original letters to and from Proust, and that's why we're hosting this project at this institution. And the Corr of the Corr-Proust stands for correspondence, which is why we're working on. That's why it's called Corr-Proust, and why we're working on his letters. And the 2 principal investigators at the University of Illinois are François Proust, who's an associate professor in French and Italian, and Caroline Silovic, who's an associate professor and the Corr-Proust librarian.
Our team transcribes the letters to put them on our website. This includes photos of the originals when permissible with copyright restrictions. The website features side-by-side views where one can see the images of the letter alongside a diplomatic transcription, which follows the format of the letter, and a linearized transcription, as well as other information about the letter.
And what makes our project unique is the text encoding done by the Corr-Proust team members in the XML editor Oxygen, which you can see on this slide. This is actually the author mode in Oxygen. And transcriptions for the website that Claire spoke about are done to reflect the content and style of the letter writer. So on the right-hand side here in Oxygen, you can see that you can add different attributes and elements to represent how a letter is laid out on the page. And on the next slide, you can see that If you're more tech savvy, you can also view the pure XML code in Oxygen in the text mode, which is a simplified version of the user-friendly interface of the author mode on the previous slide. And the overall workflow for a single letter done in Oxygen begins with a graduate student who transcribes, gives a first transcription of a letter, and then it is that letter in Oxygen goes through 4 editorial steps done by researchers and assistants in the Corr-Proust editorial team, where they add scholarly notes and verify how the XML file is displayed on the site. And I was hired last year as the Corr-Proust project manager at a point when the 2 PIs were starting to get overwhelmed with the workflow. And so they faced many dilemmas. First of all, the Corr-Proust team is not only at the University of Illinois, but it's also at 2 institutions in France. So we're working with teammates on 2 continents speaking 2 different languages. There are a total of over 6,000 letters that we need to send through a 6 to 8 step transcription, XML coding, and editorial review process before each letter is published on the site. The Corr-Proust team was using both a Google spreadsheet and box folders, and when they hired me, they were looking for one centralized location to both store their files and also to track their workflow. So the Google spreadsheet on one hand involved color coding that was not consistently used. Data could easily be deleted. And so they felt that the Google spreadsheet wasn't secure for the 6,000 letters with all this data they were trying to keep track of. And box folders, on the other hand, they were constantly being updated and renamed, but because they were also using a Google spreadsheet, they had to remember to go back and forth between the 2. And since this is the Corr-Proust team is a humanities project, we had limited funding and resources for database development. And so my job when I was hired was to streamline this workflow, but it was difficult to know where to turn on campus for help. And I'm sure that in your digital humanities projects, you're facing very similar situations. And so this is why we're doing this video tutorial, to show researchers what resources are available on most campuses, and we hope that you can learn from our experience.
So I was one of the people that Nick's team was connected to after a long and winding process that I heard took several months to make the connection. So one of the things I would like to encourage people to do, if you're part of the University of Illinois system, talk to the library. If you're part of something outside of the University of Illinois system, you might be surprised what your library knows, because reference librarians, it's their job to know who has what resources available that might be able to help you on a wide variety of topics. For our particular instance, we have the Scholarly Commons, which is one of the locations that I consult at. We have Research IT, which is specifically in the service of researcher. We have statistics consulting in particular. Technology Services is affiliated with the library through connecting consultative services. And then there is big data computing and Exceed at a nationwide scale. There are a lot of resources available that people just aren't necessarily aware of, but it's librarians' job to help people get connected to those resources. So please feel free to talk to them. I'm sure they are happy to talk, because people who like libraries like making connections like this. I say as a person with an MLIS degree. I've had quite a few people come to knocking on my door with stories very, very similar to Nick and Claire's. And that story generally goes, I need help with the database. I know my own data, but I'm not a database designer. I'm not a database programmer, and we don't have funding for it. So how can you help me shape my data and its management and its workflow using tools that are available to me inexpensively, that don't require me to go get a computer programming degree before I can start doing anything? And so I have encountered this question often enough that I now have a somewhat standardized answer. We are going to be looking at this particular implementation of it, but the pieces of the process have been pretty common across dozens and dozens of these consultations. They don't always end up at SharePoint. Sometimes they end up at other platforms. Sometimes they end up at other mechanisms. This is just where the process led us in this particular location. The first thing that we did was something that's very similar to a reference interview. We got together in a room with a whiteboard. If we were doing it now, it would probably be like on Google Jamboard to be able to draw digitally instead of physically. But we laid out a diagram of what are the components of what it is that they're doing. In this case, we needed to understand elements about the letters, elements about the process, who was going to be doing what, who had authentication to do what. Were they all at the University of Illinois? No. Okay, that adds complications in which particular services we can and can't use. And then what does the process look like now, and which parts of that are causing you pain that we want to change? In this particular case, the right-hand column, folder A, folder B, folder C, folder D, that was physically copying and renaming each of these XML files from person to person as it stepped through the process. And so one of the complication points was if something got updated in the spreadsheet but not in the folder system, which of them was authentic. If you're looking at the version that is in folder B, what happens if there's another one in folder C just under a different name? So being able to have a single authoritative, most up-to-date version of the file that people could see what had happened to it throughout its history was going to be very important to making their workflow lives easier. That was one of the things that we identified as a top pain point to solve. Another thing that we identified as a top pain point was the multilingual interface, which meant that we were going to be wanting to look at solutions that were larger scale than something that was custom coded on this campus. And another pain point was, again, the disconnect between the spreadsheet, which could be easily accidentally deleted, and the box files, which were being manually copied sometimes and being renamed often, and which version was the most current edition. So that was our processes pain points. I would imagine that many other projects have similar pain points. They just might not be XML files particularly. But looking both at the workflow and at what you're wanting to make better is a key component of trying to solve a problem, because I also start with the philosophy of don't make a change just to make a change when it will make an active improvement. I try to go with the principle of do the least harm that will get to the solution that people need. Let's see here. So let's see here. For needs and trials, in this particular case, we have content contributors from multiple universities, which means that university restricted stuff is not going to work. We have the multilingual interface, which meant that something like Google or Box or Microsoft was going to be easier to adapt than something custom coded. We had the data entry validation. We had the file validation with the version history. When looking at that assembly of needs, we then decided what it was that we wanted to make trials with. Again, starting with the principle of least disruption, we tried to make the Google and Box edition work. We looked at ways of using Box skills to automatically update the Google Sheet on triggers. We looked at Microsoft Flow. We looked at several different ways of adding a layer of automation on top of the existing system. But the core problem was that the Google Sheet was just too fragile. There wasn't a way to prevent accidents from happening, and there wasn't a way to very precisely locate a particular element and it cause other actions to happen on top of it. Basically, at that point, we started saying, what you actually need here, I think, is a content management system. There are a lot of content management systems out there. WordPress, Drupal, Joomla are some of the big public-facing ones. And one of the things about our campus edition of SharePoint is that it is view restricted to people who are authenticated into the system. So if the problem that you have ends up with information that needs to be publicly available, SharePoint may or may not be a great solution for you if you're looking at the University of Illinois instance of it. But in this particular case, everything that we were doing here revolved around an internal workflow. And the publishing was on the Corr-Proust website, but this was about the internal team's own working. And so SharePoint, we thought, might be a viable option. One of the reasons that I like looking at things like SharePoint, things like Google Docs, is that there is a vast gap between the amount of custom coding that is desired in the world and the amount of resources that are available to buy it. For us, no-code development brings a couple of specific benefits. One of them is the fact that many projects don't have a dedicated developer and database designer on their team. Another is that using the no-code development philosophy ends up producing a product that the team members themselves have helped to build and that the team members themselves understand and can refine for many common purposes without having to involve somebody else outside the team, without having to get in a line for limited programming or database development time. So building it with a point and click sort of interaction method in a fairly easily taught interface helped us to both build rapid prototypes that we could compare side by side to see which path worked best, and create something that the teammates themselves felt empowered to keep using.
We turned to SharePoint in order to better manage our workflow and to perform the necessary tasks in a more efficient way for a variety of reasons. The first one is the multilingual interface. As we've mentioned, we needed to work across French and English with French and English speakers, and SharePoint allows you to customize the language by user. In terms of being able to more easily locate certain elements of our data among our whole data set, the searchable grid view is crucial. There are also views. SharePoint allows for views by stage of the process, which is very useful for managing workflow, assigning tasks from the point of view of the project manager, being able to easily locate your assigned tasks if you're one of the RAs doing the transcriptions. Also, SharePoint features automatic version control. It stores every version of files that are uploaded. And finally, it features integrated storage for transcribers. And with the next slide, I can elaborate a little bit further on the point of view of the graduate RAs who are doing the transcriptions, who are at the base of the project. Previously, this screenshot sort of shows what it was like from the point of view of the RA doing the transcription. As you can see, we had a number of tools that we needed that we were juggling all at once. Some were tied to Box, some were tied to Google Sheets, multiple different tabs. Some were tied to separate websites. Certain were files that one had to have just ready and open on their computer. In the next slide, you'll see more what it was like after. So now that we have SharePoint, all of the necessary resources and tools for transcription are located in one place. So this image shows a sample folder that is designed for one letter of Marcel Proust. And as you can see, all of the different resources from the images to previous publications are all stored in one place, which makes the act of doing transcriptions much more efficient. So it's really not only more efficient for the project manager who's organizing workflow, but also on the level of the RAs doing the transcriptions. So the first round of results. On the Corr-Proust team, there were a number of things that we found really positive about SharePoint after first being introduced to it. Firstly, the fact that it's intuitive and user-friendly, as none of us had previous experience with SharePoint. Next, that it helped streamline workflow, as I said, from the point of view of the project manager and for the other RAs doing transcriptions. It can be developed and maintained by the team who uses it. So at this point, for every modification that we make on SharePoint, we don't necessarily need tech consultants until it gets more complicated. And for that reason, we're also now prepared for staff transition. The project manager position is an RA, a graduate student RA that changes every year or two. But now the fact that the skill set for maintaining SharePoint is shared among team members, it can also then be easily transferred between the different project managers.
When you're developing a content management system, it's important after first developing a prototype to identify the positive feedback that Claire outlined, but it's also important to identify so aspects that needed work, that needed to be tweaked. So after this first round of results, the Corr-Proust team found that it was difficult to find a specific file or folder quickly. We had 6,000 letters, and we needed to be able to, instead of sifting through different views, we needed to be able to quickly identify the specific letter that we're working on. And in the specific view, we realized that that it wasn't grouped as effectively as we needed it to. So we tweaked that a little bit, and we also found that assigning names was limited to only, by default in SharePoint, was only limited to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign users. And so I worked with Dena and some other SharePoint experts to figure out a way to tweak that area of it in order to be able to work not only on the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign campus, but I'm sure with your projects as well, working with users outside of just one campus.
So one of the things that we encountered is agile development and rapid prototyping is great for exploring and for getting up to a certain level. I, not being a SharePoint specific specialist, found that there were things that the team needed to know about that I was not equipped to solve for them. But fortunately, we have consultants in a variety of areas who work on an hourly basis. They're called field consultants, and Darius Somerville was the particular field consultant that we worked with to be able to solve the SharePoint problems that I did not personally know how to resolve. So when they have, for every file that they have, for every XML file, there are several images, possibly some PDFs, possibly some Word documents that are going along with them. Once you cross 5,000 items in a particular library, SharePoint benefits from index introduction to make the search process more efficient. Darius also helped us configure the search engine because by default, the SharePoint online search would search all of the spaces that were available. They wanted this particular space to just search its own space. They were able to, with Darius's help, optimize the field types and the lookups because there's a maximum number of those that SharePoint Online will handle happily. And so once you get beyond the testing stage and into the actual production volume, there are efficiencies and optimizations that you can really benefit from having an expert do the refining on. And finally, in order to make everybody more comfortable with the prospect of continuing to do revisions as the workflow and process continue to evolve, we made a test replica of the live site in order for us to be able to experiment on something that would not do substantial changes to the production side until we knew exactly what changes that we wanted to make. And so taking this sort of approach helps us make cost-effective use of the paid consultant's time, because my library volunteer time is limited to 4 hours a week and to what I personally know. So we knew when to call in the more precise consultant experts when we had more expansive needs.
One of the reasons that SharePoint was such an effective solution for us is the fact that it was cost effective and we had a limited budget. The SharePoint Online itself through our university was free. It allowed the graduate students who had already been hired to do transcriptions and manage workflow to do their same tasks, but do it now faster and more easily. So essentially, again, SharePoint didn't make us change what we were doing, but just allowed us to keep doing what we were doing and mold SharePoint to fit our needs. Then when we needed to go to a consultant, we were able to pay them hourly, which resulted in a total of under $500. Whereas the quotes we had gotten from local design development firms would have been over $25,000. And this wouldn't have even included the multilingual interface, which, as we've emphasized, was a crucial component for our team.
And when I joined the team as a project manager, I was asked to streamline workflow on basically no budget. And I thought it was an impossible task at first. But with the help of resources on campus that I hope that all of you on your projects will be able to find as well on your respective campuses, I believe that you can not only succeed, but exceed your colleagues' expectations like we did in our project. As Claire said, we could have probably made SharePoint work at no cost at all. And we only spent money to make things even more user-friendly. And we believe that in your projects, you can also use SharePoint or another content management system that will leave you with this cost-effective solution.
So the part that we would like for everybody to take away from this is the pattern of how to get from I don't know what to do with this pile of stuff to now I know what to do and this is the solution that we can work at. Part of my background is in usability and accessibility. And so when you combine that with my experience as a technical writer, I really feel for the fact that a lot of usability focus is on the front end that is given to end users. And I think that putting more usability assessment into teams like Nick and Claire's will help more people come up with a better solution for the people who are doing the research and contributing the information along the way. So look at specifically the pain points like the screenshot that Claude showed us of all of those different windows that you had to have open at the same time and all of the different ways that the process could go wrong. Identify what's not working about your current solution in order to find the pain points, in order to prioritize what it is that you really want to solve. Then instead of jumping immediately feet first into one specific solution, test out several of them. Build little prototypes, give them a test run, and in this particular case, while we were making that determination process, we asked for an hour of time from our box expert, an hour of time from our SharePoint expert, an hour of time from specific individuals, rather than committing to 6 months of development on a particular item that turns out to have some critical failure point that we hadn't anticipated at the beginning. Being able to make quick agile prototypes and being able to put those in front of the people who will be using the system gives them the chance to say, this works for us, this doesn't work for us. Is it possible to refine this? And to figure out the rough-hewn shape of what will be further refined later on. When you're testing the different waters, I suppose it's a little bit like sampling things at a bake sale. You take a couple of bites of different varieties of things, and you're going to know fairly early on which one is going to taste good over the long term. I have had other groups say, all right, the solution that we need is WordPress, or the solution that we need is Drupal, or the solution we need is Box specifically. For this particular product, using a look at what it was that they particularly needed, SharePoint solved many of the problems that they needed intrinsically to what it was, and others, it was a flexible enough platform to be able to refine. We could do things like saying, we only care about the XML files, and so only show us the XML files in this view. We could do things like saying, we want these particular 4 stages to be custom created. We could say we do or we don't want email to be sent to people. But in order to be able to build that, we needed to understand upfront what it was that they wanted their ideal world workflow to look like in order to be able to get as close to that as we could using the tools that we had available. So the process that I go through with this team and with the others that I consult with is, number 1, talk through specifically understanding and making sure that the consultant that you're working with understands what the gathering process looks like, what the working with it process looks like, and what the final state looks like, whether that is publishing, storing, or whatever the end process of your data is. You will want to know what your file types are. You will want to know what stages they go through as they're being handled. You want to know what's going to be public, what's going to be private, and you will want to know whether visualizations, for example, need to be static, dynamic, automatically generated, where the data is coming from. Once you've wrapped your head around what it is that everything goes through right now, what it is that you're doing right now, and where your pain points are right now, then you're in a position that you can look at what tools have you got available to make it better? Do you have a system administrator? Who is going to be contributing the content? How many locations are they coming from? Are they all in the same university or not? And what effect does that have on access to particular platforms that are available? Do you have a database designer or manager? Do you have programmers? If you don't, what low-code solutions are available to you? And there may be more of them than you expect. SharePoint Online is just the one that we chose for this particular platform. Box is an option for many people. There is something called Microsoft Flow that allows more programmatic things to happen in particular sequences, sometimes across multiple platforms. That is one that we have used for other purposes. Microsoft Flow does interact best with Microsoft products, but you can point it at something that is stored in Box or Google as a possibility. And so after you have talked through your workflow and analyzed the tools and skills that you have available among your team, that's when it helps to identify, here's our top 3 candidates of things that may make this workflow better. The things you're going to want to look at in these little prototypes are, have you got something that makes the process easier for people at each of the stages of the workflow? And what are your top priority features? How can you get as many of the top priority features into your first prototype as possible? And then once you've got something that you think is, worth the taste testing, then let the people who were not involved in the actual building experiment with them. That is one of the key user experience tenets, is don't have the person who did the engineering do the user assessment. So when I was building prototypes, I would have Nick try them out. And when Nick and I were involved in building the prototypes, we'd have Claire and their team try them out in order to be able to get the actual feedback from the people who were not involved in the design, to say things like, yeah, this is working great. No, this other thing, do you understand this particular part of the process is not going to work quite the way that you expected, because the person doing the developing can't possibly be someone who has experience with all of the roles, generally speaking. So being able to do small, fast prototypes, get fast user feedback, and integrate that feedback is one of the keys to making this low-code development and revision process work.
In terms of the lessons we learned, first we have not sure where to refer someone, libraries know where to find consultants, which really underlines one of the base lessons we learned, which is how to tap into resources that are already available to us. And in our case, that we may not have been aware were available to us. And in our case, this was really turning to the library. And even if for tech assistance, even if the people we were connected with didn't know what we needed to know, they knew how to find the people who knew what we needed to know.
Something I've also found incredibly valuable is making sure that the team is involved in building whatever solution it is, that I do not just go into my little corner for 4 hours, build a thing and hand it over out of sight. We did a lot of team-based building within our consulting time, working out together where it was that the controls were, and exploring it together and discussing as we were building it. Would this work better? Would that work better? Oh, this person really doesn't want email, so we shouldn't use the default method of correspondence. Being able to work collaboratively with the people on the team in the process of building it both helps the team understand what's going on under the hood and helps get a thing that is more precisely tuned to their needs. However, there will sometimes be times when you need a particular element that is outside your consultant's experience. And so that's another reason why identifying the pro and paying the pro for an hour or two of their time can be more cost and stress effective than it would have been, for example, for me to spend 3 weeks doing the research to learn what Darius just automatically knew off the bat. That helped us effectively focus the available consulting budget and say, I can do this much. Darius can solve these other problems, pay him for a couple of hours, and we can go on with the user experience assessment. That is the piece that I bring to it. And so also, Agile theory of small, quick prototypes and quick revision goes great with low code and no code development. You can build a thing, you can click a button, you can try it out, you can see if it works, and if it doesn't work, you can go on to the next thing. And you don't have to spend several hours figuring out where's the missing semicolon, where is the missing angle bracket. I mean, absolutely no disrespect. I have the greatest of respect for people who are wired for command line programming. But I have noticed that there's far more call for the people who have those skills than there are people available to do it. So if you're in a situation, which many of the people who come to me for consulting help are, in that you don't have one of those command line whizzes on your team already, let's look at the tools that will make it possible for the people who are on the team to do their work without having to learn what is basically a foreign language in order to do it.
Yeah, and as Dena said, by working with the resources available on our campus, we have definitely felt empowered developing our content management system. And for us, that was SharePoint. When we decided to streamline our work processes, most of us had little to no tech experience. And we really appreciate how user-friendly SharePoint has been for our project, and that it is still complex enough to adapt to our workflow instead of us having to adapt to it. It allowed us to make a seamless transition between me as a project manager last year and transitioning to Claire managing the SharePoint content management system site for our project. And so overall, we hope you enjoyed this video tutorial on our project, and we hope that you can use some strategies we went through for your own projects in developing content management systems. We are very much looking forward to discussing this more with you during our live Q&A session of the workshop. Thank you.